going to start with kind of the world of scouting. So scouting is, as of last year, there's about 57 million scouts in the world, both young people and adults, across 216 countries in the world. And Scouts Canada has about almost 55,000 members as of February this year, which is down from pre-COVID times, but it is getting back up there. And then by joining scouting, you're becoming part of a huge family. Kind of where scouting started. So Lord Robert Baden-Powell was a British Army officer, writer, first Chief Scout of the world. And his sister co-founded the World Girl Guide Girl Scout movement. On a return home from Africa in 1903, he learned that his military textbooks had become bestsellers and were being used by teachers in youth organizations for training boys in observation and woodcraft. So what happened? I'm sure we all know. In 1907, he held an experimental camp on Brownsea Island off the south coast of England to test out his ideas for this book, Scouting for Boys. Obviously, this camp was a success because we are all here. Well, I am here today. And so then in 1908, he wrote 6 installments of the book, approximately 70 pages each, published between January and March. And this book, a lot of people claim, is the second best-selling book in the world, only second to the Bible. So scouting came to Canada almost a year later with 3 troops established almost simultaneously. In 1910, Baden-Powell retires from the Army and forms the Scout Association on the advice of the King at the time, King Edward VII, who suggested that he could better serve his country by promoting scouting. And then in 1912, the Boy Scout Association was granted a royal charter throughout the Commonwealth by King George. So that is officially when what is now known as Scouts Canada was established. England Scouts. Scouts Canada was 1914. And then in 2007, the Boy Scouts Canada legally changed their name to Scouts Canada. So now we get into our local area, and to start off, there's kind of 4 key figures that helped form our local scout groups that we are recognizing throughout this year. The first off is Gordon Medley. So he was the pioneer scout organizer in Kenora, one of the earliest scout masters of St. Albans Scout Troop. In 1925, he was considered one of the oldest active scouters in Ontario at age 62. And he later became an honorary scout commissioner and was among those presented to the King and Queen when they passed through Reddit by train in 1946. And next up is Captain Frank Edwards. So he is a World War I veteran who, after being refused by Canadian forces, he returned to England and enlisted with the King's Own Royal Lancaster Regiment. In 1917, he received a shrapnel wound in battle and was returned to England, where he met his wife, and they married in 1918 in London. So he came back to Canada, and in 1920, he was appointed Indian Agent for the Kenora District, a position he held till 1942. And among his association with Boy Scouts, he was the first president for the local organization in the early 1920s and was a big part of local scouting for many years. And he was also a Rotarian. He was associated with many organizations. He was a Rotarian for 21 years and served as president. He was a member of the Kenora Anglers Club, the YMCA, Masonic Golden Chapter. And it is nice that we are holding this meeting at the museum today, because when he died, he had a great collection of Indian folklore, or he was interested in Indian folklore and legends, and he collected many artifacts throughout his times, and he kept detailed notes of his collection. And when he died, his collection of artifacts was donated to the town of Kenora. And when the museum was established in 1964, his collection formed the foundation of artifacts and received catalog number 964.1. Next up is Reverend Edward Diamond. So he was the rector of St. Albans Cathedral from 1917 to the fall of 1928. He was the first cub leader of the Wolf Cub Pack from when it formed in late 1923 to the fall of 1928, when he left to become the rector of St. Paul's Church in Schenectady, New York. And then the last one is C.K. Hewitt. He came to Kenora in the early 1920s, and he was the scoutmaster of the newly formed Iroquois troop which eventually became 2nd Kenora. And he was district president, commissioner for many years, and he was a resident of Longbow Lake from 1945 until he died in 51. And after his death, the scout camp located on Longbow Lake was renamed to the Colin K. Hewitt Memorial Scout Camp. So those are kind of the 4 founders of scouting in our local scouting group. But before that, there was a couple failed attempts to get a scout group started. The first one was in 1916. The troop was simply known as Kenora Boy Scouts, with J.H. Gibson as scoutmaster. But this was during the wartime, and then things happened and it didn't get off the ground. But it seems most records have been lost. We actually found this note in the archives for the Kenora papers as we were looking for the history of scouting. So then we moved to 1922. That is when the first successful attempt to form a troop was, with Gordon Medley. It had about 30 scouts. Reverend P.C. Bays attempted to form the first Keewatin Scout troop in 1922, but it did not last, unfortunately. And then Captain Frank Edwards, as I mentioned, was the first president of the new Kenora and Keewatin Boy Scout Association, a position he held for many years. Kenora's first scout camp was in August 1922. According to the newspaper records, 23 scouts attended this camp. Their scouter Gordon Medley was the main leader for this camp, with others, including Reverend Diamond, helping out for a major portion of the week. Captain Frank Edwards arranged all transportation by boat, ensured group was properly equipped for camp using a lot of military surplus equipment. And then the big event of the week was the Wednesday afternoon when the Rotarians visited the scouts out at camp, and they had lunch together. That is wording right from the paper. So then in May 1923, scouting is starting to take off in town. They decide to form the Kenora and Keewatin Association of the Boy Scouts. And at that meeting, 11 committee members are present and several subcommittees are appointed. Late 1923, Reverend Diamond gets Wolf Cubs going kind of at the St. Albans schoolroom. And then at that time, the newspaper was the biggest form of communication, so they would publish their meeting notices in the newspaper. That is for the Cubs and then one for the Scouts. So thank you, library, for digitizing all those archives. One of the big events of the past Scouts was the field day. It was a yearly competition held around Labor Day or Thanksgiving at Central Park. Several activities such as running, long jump, high jump, kind of anything a track and field would do. And then in early 1924, Chief Scout Robert Baden-Powell visited Kenora to inspect both the Kenora and Keewatin Scout troops. This is important because what happened next was we officially became a scout group. So on April 28th, 1924, the Boy Scouts of Canada signed a charter granting St. Albans Anglican Church permission to sponsor this newly formed scout group, making our group, as it stands today, the first chartered scout group in Kenora and Keewatin. We were officially charter number 179, so we were the 179th official scout group in Canada. And Reverend Edward Diamond, was rector for St. Albans, was the person to sign this charter on behalf of St. Albans. And the new scout group consisted of the Wolf Cub Pack and the newly renamed 2nd Kenora Iroquois Boy Scout Troop, which C.K. Hewitt was scoutmaster of, whose meetings quickly moved from the First Baptist Church to St. Albans Cathedral. And that is how we are celebrating 100 today. So after that, 3rd Kenora Group was formed in late 1924 as the Iroquois Troop was split in half. Originally known as the B3 Troop, then the Viking Troop. May 1925 is when they officially dedicated the Union Jack flag presented by Commissioner Edwards for the new 3rd Kenora Troop. 4th Kenora followed shortly after in late 1925 at Notre Dame. Then the first Kenora troop was formed at Knox Church with C.K. Hewitt moving from 2nd Kenora to 1st Kenora. And 1926 is when they got their Union Jack. And it was named the Mohawk Troop of the United Church at the beginning. However, that troop did not last long. I think it was about a year. So the YMCA had a scout troop for a little while too, with Gordon Medley moving to that one. So in the 1930s, the Great Depression hit. Scout leaders were hard to come by. But after some successful reorganizing attempts, we made it. And so in 1935, Chief Scout Robert Baden-Powell was welcomed by Kenora Scouts at a train station in Reddit. They presented him with a couple gifts. Scouts made a bonfire in the ballpark, and the fire was controlled. And then the following day, he made a brief appearance in Kenora to address the Scouts. Commissioner Frank Edwards got to have some time with BP in the rail car and have a quick chat with him about where scouting was at in Kenora. BP was quite impressed from what the newspaper article said. He had just come from a few days in Winnipeg and had hoped to spend more time fishing here, but he couldn't. So.
Even back then, they didn't have time for fishing.
Right. He tried. So then 1936 is when the first Keewatin group was originally chartered by the Boy Scouts of Canada, sponsored by the Elks Lodge in Keewatin. And then 1937, first Kenora troop was revived once again with meetings held at the YMCA. And in 1939, the first Keewatin group builds a new scout shack located behind the town hall. So it is unknown when the original Reddit group was formed, but in September 1948, there's an article in the newspaper that says that the group has been revived under the leadership of an Anglican missionary. In 1949, the first Canadian Scout Jamboree is held in Ottawa, and 6 scouts from Kenora attended this camp out of just shy of 2,600 scouts. That is the badge from that camp because scouts like badges. So 1950, we have the 5th Kenora group formed and gets their charter at the First Baptist Church. So scouting is really starting to take off locally at this point. 1950, the Salvation Army Cub Pack is reformed in Kenora. They were briefly around in the late 20s, but their revival also didn't last long. 1950, Dennis Danielson's a King Scout. He was a member of the first Keewatin Scout Troop. He probably was the first one locally to receive that award from what we've found. It's kind of a snapshot from a newspaper in 1951 of the registration numbers. You see totally 44 scouts, 90 cubs, more than half of them at 3rd Kenora. So this led to creation of a couple more groups. So 1951, 6th Kenora Rabbit Lake group is formed with their first meetings held above George Murray's garage and chartered in October 51. In 1952, they would build the Jeffrey Mellett Community Club, which was at the time named the Rabbit Lake Boys Clubhouse and renamed Rabbit Lake Community Hall, and that would become the group's sponsor. In October 51, the 7th Kenora group is formed at Evergreen, and that is formed due to overcrowding at 3rd Kenora Cubs because they had 49 cubs. So a lot of them went to this new group. But that group unfortunately didn't last long, and they closed in 52, we think. So after C.K. Hewitt's death in 1951, a service was held at the Scout Camp in 52 with over 250 visitors attending the service, and the camp was renamed Colin K. Hewitt Memorial Boy Scout Camp. And Mrs. Hewitt herself, we also have to say, she was a volunteer in scouting for many, many years, both with local Girl Guides and Boy Scouts, and she was the Akela for the 2nd Kenora Wolf Cub Pack during the early 1950s. After that, the 8th Kenora group is formed. Meetings are held at the number 4 schoolhouse. we honestly have no idea where that was. So if anyone knows, please tell me, because all the newspaper articles just refer to number 4 schoolhouse. Yeah. So if someone back then knew where it was. Fall of 1952, the 9th Kenora group is formed with meetings held at the Cecilia Jeffrey School. 53, local scouter George Burham is awarded the Medal of Merit for good services in scouting. He was one of the first scouters in Kenora and Keewatin to be awarded this medal, which is, at the time, was one of scouting's highest awards. And then 1955-56, the 10th Kenora group was formed with Notre Dame Church as their sponsor. In 1957, 2 scouts from 3rd Kenora Troop attended the 9th World Scout Jamboree in England to celebrate the centennial of BP's birthday and the 50th anniversary of scouting. In total, approximately 40,000 scouts from over 80 countries attended this camp. Then 58, we get our first Sea Scouts group. Unfortunately, today we do not have any Sea Scouts locally. 1960, 4th Kenora group is revived. So it's important that we got up to 10th Kenora with groups, but there was never a point where all 10 of those groups were operating at the same time. There was always one group that was on a hiatus and kind of back and forth. And then 1960, the Scout, what is now known as Scout Island, is donated to the first Keewatin group by the estate of Thomas Elliott of Keewatin, Ontario. And for anyone that's been out to Scout Island before and may remember what it looked like back in the day, this is kind of what it looks like as of today. So a lot of work has been done. There's a great group of people that are doing maintenance on the island constantly and kind of keeping the grounds looking like it's cared for. So then kind of back to the 60s, we have another group formed. This time it's the first Norman group. They had a Sea Scout group and a Scout group. So in 1961 at the district meeting, the Kenora Keewatin district kind of shortened their name up to be the Kenkee district, and they come up with that badge design. That is not the first badge design, but that is kind of what it is. The bridge on there is modeled after the Tunnel Island Bridge that connects Kenora with Norman and Keewatin. And then 1964, the 9th Kenora group has the district's first venture company. Ventures was an experimental program at that time and became official in 1966. So it was quite the honor for Kenora to get one of the experimental groups. 65, when the maple leaf flag was first introduced, the 4th Kenora group was the first ones to purchase and fly this new flag. They had various fundraisers to be able to purchase it. And then 1976 is when our first Cub Car Rally is held at Lakewood School, with a Cub from 2nd Kenora being the overall winner. And then also in May 1976, right after that Cub Car Rally, Scouter George Noble became the first Scouter in Kenora and Keewatin to receive a Silver Acorn Award, which is awarded for distinguished service to scouting that extends beyond group or section level. That is the second highest award that a volunteer Scouter can receive. And then in 78, 2 scouts of the 2nd Kenora group received their Chief Scout Award at a ceremony in Grey Wolf Camp in Thunder Bay. We think it's possible these are the first ones because we don't have many records from the 70s. And then in 81, 82, Jack Nicholson becomes the first scout in the Kenkee region to receive the Duke of Edinburgh Award. 1991, 4th Kenora group is revived once again, now sponsored by the Moose Lodge. And then 92, 5th Kenora is revived. 1998 is when Scouts Canada made it a policy for all program sections to be co-ed. It had been optional since 1992, and then a few years before that it was optional in certain sections, the older sections. In 2007, for celebrating the 100th anniversary of Scouting, our local Scouter Oline Jones was awarded the Silver Acorn Award for her many years of distinguished service to Scouting. She became the second Scouter to receive this award after George Noble in the late 70s. On August 1st, 2007, a sunset ceremony was held at the Kenora Harbourfront to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Scouting. All local sections that were active at that time were represented, as well as many current and former Scout leaders in attendance. The sunset ceremonies were held in approximately 155 countries around the world and many places in Canada. It was to celebrate Scouting's 100th birthday, as August 1st was the date that the Brown Sea Island Camp in 1907 was officially started, and Scouts' first flag raising and flag lowering ceremonies were held. 2008, once again, 5th Kenora was revived, sponsored by the LDS Church. And we had one more group formed. This time it was the Kenora Ventures, as they were formed at the Masonic Lodge. In 2012, Oline was awarded the Silver Wolf for her many years of outstanding service to Scouting at local, provincial, and national levels. This one is the highest award a volunteer Scouter can receive. And to date, she's the only local Scouter that we know of that has been awarded the Silver Wolf. And then in 2020, she was presented with an honorary Paul Harris from the Rotary Club of Kenora for her work with Scouts Canada in Kenora, Northern Ontario, and Canada for over 40 years. And we were all very proud of her and lucky to be in attendance for that ceremony to see her accept that award. In 2020, there were only 3 active groups remaining in the Kenkee area. So first Keewatin had a Cub Pack, second with a Beaver and a Cub Pack, and third Kenora had the Scout Troop. As COVID was kind of happening during this time, volunteers were getting a little scarce. The Northern Ontario Council decided that these 3 remaining groups would be merged into one, forming one large group. At that time was known as the Kenkee Group. We have since reverted to the second Kenora group name that was used from 1924 until 2020 here. And as I mentioned, COVID, so all Scouting activities were suspended in person, and we continued to meet through a series of at-home challenges, online meetings. And as soon as we were allowed to meet outside in small groups, we went for it. We did a lot of meetings at Anishinaabe Park and other places, until we were suspended again in 2021. But then once things got back to normal in late 2021, I think it was, things have been normal ever since. 2022, we got to do a meeting with the Rotary Club where you guys practiced various knots and made some s'mores with the Scouts. A couple photos from that evening as we tested your knot skills. So for this year, our 100th anniversary celebrations, as I mentioned, we went back to the second Kenora group name that was used until 2020. On February 22nd, we gathered at St. Albans, and Beavers Cub Scouts entertained their families, a member of St. Albans, with an indoor formal Scouting campfire. Each section performed a song, skit, and cheer. Campfire also included a short story in the history of Scouting and coffee and cake. I had the honor of presenting a plaque to Reverend Marion Jackson to commemorate the 100-year anniversary of Scouting of St. Albans being a community partner to Kenkee Scouting. And then April 28th, we were back at St. Albans, happened to fall on a Sunday. So the second Kenora group celebrated their 100th anniversary with Scouter Oline doing a presentation during the 10 a.m. church service, followed by coffee and members of St. Albans Cathedral, hosted by members of St. Albans Cathedral, sorry. And she had a beautiful display of many historical items, photo albums from local Scouting activities. That is our cake we had on February 22nd. So we had it specially designed for the 100th anniversary. And then this is the display that featured our group's charter and our necker with the St. Albans crest on the back, and then the plaque that we presented to St. Albans to commemorate the 100th anniversary. This was on after the April 28th church service. So we thank them for that. So this is kind of a list of all the groups that we have confirmed so far that have existed at some point between 1924 and 2024. So there's about 18 groups on that list in total that have existed at some point. We're sure there's probably a one-off group that lasted about 3 months at some other point, but that is kind of the list. So then as we are today, we have 3 sections left. So 2nd Kenora Beavers and Cubs, and then the 3rd Kenora Scouts. And as of this month, we have a combined membership of 37 youth and a small team of 10 volunteer scouters. Our modern day scouting year, some of our biggest events are the Rapid Races, which is our annual Cub Car Rally, includes beaver buggies, scout trucks, usually held in April. Our Kenkee area camps, which are held at Rushing River Provincial Park. We invite a lot of out-of-town groups for this one. For many years, camps were held at Longbow Lake area, and before I moved to Rushing River sometime in the 80s. Those of you that might remember Peter Pincombe, he was a big part of this camp, planning this camp for a number of years. And then a trip I just came back from actually is Many Point Scout Camp. So every August we fundraise, take the Scouts down to a camp in Minnesota. Offers Scouts opportunity to experience scouting in another country. Several groups from the Boy Scouts of America attend this week-long camp as well. As today, Scouts Canada's mission statement is to help develop well-rounded youth better prepared for success in the world. The vision is Canadian youth making a meaningful contribution to creating a better world. So Scouting values really haven't changed in the last 100 years. There's duty to God, whatever your God is. Duty to others. Responsibility to one's local, national, and global community members to promote peace, understanding, cooperation through participation in the development of society, respect for dignity of one's fellow beings, and protection of integrity of the natural world. And then duty to yourself. It's responsibility to develop for the development of oneself to one's full potential. And then Scouting achieves this through 8 elements, starting with the Scout Law and Promise, which is the values I just mentioned. Learning by doing. The team system. Symbolic framework. So Beavers is based off the Friends of the Forest book, and Cub Scouts are based off the Jungle Book still. Nature, we try to do as much outside as we can. Personal progression, adult support, and community involvement. And that is the group with the Lions Club earlier this year at the Walk for Guide Dogs. So this is our group photo from the 2022 Cub Cart Rally. So it's got all our Beavers, Cubs, Scouts, leaders all together. There, our Beaver Colony. So Beavers was designed and tested in Winnipeg beginning in 1971 by those 3 names. In 1972, it was expanded across Canada and made officially part of Scouts Canada in 1974. Their motto is sharing, sharing, sharing. The Cub Pack, beginning in 1916, which started when all the younger brothers of the Scouts wanted to join Scouting, but they didn't have a place to go. So BP based this program on the C&E Pack created in the Jungle Book by his friend Rudyard Kipling. And over 100 years later, the Wolf Cubs still use the Jungle Book as the basis for their program. And their motto is do your best. And then the Scouts. The first section established by BP in 1907 was originally for youth ages 11 through 16, but this was changed in 1966 when Scouts Canada's program underwent many changes. Ventures were introduced at that time, so Scouts was restricted to ages 11 through 14. And Scout motto is be prepared. And finally, the volunteer support. So there are many important roles that make a successful scouting group. Youth in Scouting are directly supported by their section scouters. Section scouters are supported by the scouters who work behind the scenes as members of the group committee. Various roles such as finance, fundraising, event planning, program support, volunteer recruitment and screening, and many other roles. And then group committee members are supported by the group commissioner, who is then supported by members of Northern Ontario Council. And that is all I got. Our scouting adventure will continue, hopefully, for a number of years to come. So.